Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. They made their way to the kitchen, Dan still wearing the green dress. As Crystal prepared the coffee, Dan sat at the table, absently running his hands over the fabric of the skirt. "So," Crystal said as she set a steaming mug in front of him and took a seat across the table. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Dan took a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I can't stop thinking about yesterday. How it felt to wear the dress, to have makeup on. It was nice, really nice. And that scares me a little." Crystal reached across the table and took his hand. "Why does it scare you?" "Because I don't know what it means," Dan admitted. "Is this just a one-time thing? A bit of fun? Or is it more than that? And if it is more, what does that say about me?" Crystal squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It doesn't have to mean anything you don't want it to mean, Dan. If you enjoyed it and want to explore it further, that's okay. If you decide it was a fun experiment but not something you want to continue, that's okay too. There's no rule book for this." Dan nodded, feeling some of the tension leave his body. "You're right. I guess I'm just not used to feeling this way. It's like, for the first time in months, I felt excited about something. Like I had a purpose, even if that purpose was just trying on a dress and makeup." Crystal smiled softly. "That's not a small thing, Dan. Finding something that makes you feel good, that gives you a sense of purpose. That's important, especially given how rough things have been lately." "You're not weirded out by this?" Dan asked hesitantly. Crystal shook her head. "Not at all. I love seeing you happy, Dan. And yesterday, you looked happier than I've seen you in a long time. If wearing a dress and makeup does that for you, then I'm all for it." Dan felt a wave of relief wash over him. "You're amazing. You know that? I don't know how I got so lucky." "I feel pretty lucky too," Crystal said with a grin. "So, what do you want to do now? The day is young and you're already dressed up." Dan chuckled, looking down at the dress he was still wearing. "I don't know. Part of me wants to keep exploring this, but another part is scared of what that might mean." Crystal stood up and came around the table, wrapping her arms around Dan from behind. "How about we take it one step at a time? No pressure, no expectations. We can start small. Maybe we could look online for some clothes you might like to try. Or we could experiment more with makeup." "Whatever you're comfortable with." Dan leaned back into her embrace, feeling grateful for her support. "That sounds good. I think I'd like to try on some more clothes, if that's okay." "Of course it's okay," Crystal said, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Why don't you go take a shower, and I'll see what I can find online." As Dan showered, he let the warm water wash away the last traces of yesterday's makeup and his lingering doubts. He felt a sense of anticipation building, not anxiety, but excitement for what the day might bring. When he emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, he found Crystal sitting on the bed with her laptop. "Come look at what I found," she said, patting the spot next to her. Dan sat down, peering at the screen. Crystal had pulled up several online stores specializing in clothing for men who enjoyed dressing in traditionally feminine styles. "I thought we could start here," Crystal explained. "These stores cater to people of all body types, so we should be able to find things that fit you well. What do you think? See anything you like?" Dan scrolled through the pages, his eyes widening at the variety of options. Dresses, skirts, blouses, even lingerie. It was overwhelming, but exciting. "There's so much," he murmured. "I don't even know where to start." Crystal bumped his shoulder playfully. "Well, we know you look great in green. Why don't we start there? And maybe pick out a few different styles. A skirt and blouse combo, another dress, maybe something casual for around the house." They spent the next hour browsing, with Dan gradually becoming more confident in expressing his preferences. He was drawn to soft, flowing fabrics and classic feminine styles. By the time they were done, they had a small collection of items in their shopping cart, a floral sundress, a knee-length skirt with a matching blouse, a cozy sweater dress for lounging, and at Crystal's insistence, a silky nightgown. "Are you sure about this?" Dan asked as Crystal prepared to submit the order. "It's a lot of money." Crystal hugged him softly. "I'm sure. Consider it an investment in your happiness. Besides, I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy seeing you in these clothes just as much as you'll enjoy wearing them." As she clicked the place order button, Dan felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This was really happening. He was really doing this. "So what now?" he asked, suddenly feeling a bit lost. Crystal closed the laptop and turned to face him. "Now, we wait for your new clothes to arrive. In the meantime, how about we practice your makeup skills? I can teach you some techniques if you'd like." Dan nodded eagerly. "I'd love that. But first, do you think I could wear the green dress again? At least until the new clothes arrive?" Crystal grinned. "I thought you'd never ask. It's hanging in the closet. Go get dressed and I'll set up the makeup in the bathroom." As Dan slipped the familiar green dress over his head, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him. He didn't know exactly where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was excited to find out. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation. Dan found himself constantly checking the tracking information for their package, eager for his new clothes to arrive. In the meantime, he and Crystal fell into a new routine. Each morning after Crystal left for work, Dan would put on the green dress. He spent hours practicing his makeup, following tutorial videos online, and experimenting with different looks. By the time Crystal returned home in the evenings, he had usually managed to create a passable, if sometimes slightly messy, full face of makeup. Crystal was always enthusiastic and supportive, offering tips and helping him perfect his technique. They spent their evenings talking, laughing, and exploring this new aspect of their relationship. Dan found himself opening up more than he had in months, sharing his fears and hopes for the future. "I've been thinking," he said one evening as they sat on the couch, Dan's head resting in Crystal's lap as she gently stroked his hair. "Maybe I should look into some online courses, to improve my job prospects." Crystal's face lit up. "That's a great idea, Dan. What kind of courses were you thinking about?" Dan shrugged slightly. "I'm not sure yet. Maybe something in digital marketing. I've always been interested in that, and it seems like there are a lot of opportunities in that field." "I think that sounds perfect for you," Crystal said encouragingly. "You've always had a knack for understanding what makes people tick. That could translate well into marketing." They spent the rest of the evening researching online courses, with Dan feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about finding a job anymore. It was about finding a career that truly interested him. Finally, 4 days after placing the order, the package arrived. Dan was practically vibrating with excitement as Crystal brought it in from the mailbox. "Do you want to open it now?" she asked, a knowing smile on her face. Dan nodded eagerly. "Yes, please." They sat on the bed together as Dan carefully opened the package. He pulled out each item reverently, running his hands over the soft fabrics. "They're even more beautiful in person," he breathed, holding up the floral sundress. Crystal grinned. "Why don't you try them on? Have a little fashion show for me." Dan didn't need to be asked twice. He gathered the clothes and disappeared into the bathroom. A few minutes later, he emerged wearing the sundress, twirling slightly to make the skirt flare out. "Oh, Dan," Crystal gasped. "You look absolutely stunning." Dan felt his cheeks flush with pleasure. "Really, it feels amazing, so light and breezy." They spent the next hour with Dan trying on each new outfit, Crystal offering enthusiastic compliments and suggesting different accessories or makeup looks to go with each one. By the time Dan slipped on the silky nightgown, he felt more confident and comfortable in his skin than he had in years. "So," Crystal said as they lay in bed that night, Dan still wearing the nightgown. "How do you feel about all of this?" Dan was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Honestly, I feel right." Like I've discovered a part of myself that was always there, just waiting to be acknowledged. Does that make sense? Crystal nodded, pulling him closer. It makes perfect sense. I'm so proud of you, Dan, for having the courage to explore this side of yourself.
I couldn't have done it without you, Dan said softly.
Your support means everything to me. As they drifted off to sleep, Dan felt a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was excited to continue this journey of self-discovery. Over the next few weeks, Dan's confidence grew along with his skills in makeup application and fashion coordination. He started each day by selecting an outfit from his new wardrobe, taking care to match his makeup to his clothes. The simple act of getting dressed and made up gave structure to his days and boosted his mood significantly. Crystal noticed the change in him immediately. Gone was the dejected, listless Dan who had been moping around the apartment. In his place was someone vibrant, engaged, and increasingly self-assured. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Crystal broached a subject that had been on her mind.
Dan, honey, I've been thinking. Have you considered going out dressed like this? Dan nearly dropped the plate he was drying. Out? You mean in public? Crystal nodded, watching his reaction carefully. I know it's a big step, but you seem so happy and comfortable at home. I thought you might want to experience that feeling out in the world, too. Dan bit his lip, considering the idea. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. I don't know, Chris. What if someone recognizes me? What if people stare or say something nasty? Crystal put down the dish she was washing and turned to face him fully. Those are valid concerns. But think about it this way. Most people are too wrapped up in their own lives to pay much attention to strangers. And if anyone did say something unkind, we'd deal with it together. I'd be right there with you. Dan felt a wave of emotion wash over him at her words. You'd really come with me. Of course I would, Crystal said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. We're in this together, remember? After a moment's hesitation, Dan nodded. Okay, let's do it. But maybe we could start small, like a quick trip to the grocery store or something? Crystal beamed at him. That sounds perfect. How about we go tomorrow evening? The store is usually pretty quiet then. They spent the rest of the evening planning for Dan's first outing. He tried on several outfits before settling on a casual knee-length skirt and a soft, flowing blouse. Crystal helped him practice a subtle makeup look that enhanced his features without being too dramatic. The next day, Dan felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety as the evening approached. He took extra care with his appearance, wanting to feel as confident as possible. As they prepared to leave the apartment, Dan hesitated at the door. Chris, I'm not sure I can do this. Crystal took his hand, interlacing their fingers. You can, Dan. You're strong and beautiful, and I'm so proud of you. But if at any point you want to leave, just say the word and we'll come straight home, okay? Dan took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, let's go. The walk to the grocery store was nerve-wracking for Dan. Every passing car, every person on the street seemed to be staring at him. But as they continued, he slowly realized that most people weren't paying them any attention at all. Inside the store, Dan kept close to Crystal as they navigated the aisles. To his surprise, no one gave him a second glance. They were just another couple doing their shopping. As they stood in the produce section debating which apples to buy, an elderly woman approached them. Excuse me, dear, she said, addressing Dan. I hope you don't mind me saying, but I just love your blouse. The color is lovely on you. Dan felt a rush of warmth. Oh, thank you so much, he managed to reply, his voice higher than usual. The woman smiled kindly and moved on. Dan turned to Crystal, his eyes wide with amazement. Did that really just happen? He whispered. Crystal grinned, squeezing his hand. It did. See, I told you, you look beautiful. The rest of the shopping trip passed without incident. By the time they were checking out, Dan felt much more relaxed. The cashier chatted with them pleasantly, not batting an eye at Dan's appearance. As they walked home, bags in hand, Dan felt a sense of elation. "I can't believe we did that," he said, laughing softly. "It wasn't nearly as scary as I thought it would be." Crystal bumped his shoulder playfully. "You were amazing. I'm so proud of you, Dan. This is a big step." Crystal bumped his shoulder playfully. "You were amazing. I'm so proud of you, Dan. This is a big step." Dan felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. As they walked, the evening air cool against his skin, he found himself standing a little taller, his steps more confident. "You know," he said, glancing at Crystal with a mischievous glint in his eye, "I think I might be ready for something a bit more adventurous next time." Crystal raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh, what did you have in mind?" Dan bit his lip, considering. "Well, there's that little cafe downtown we used to love. The one with the amazing pastries and live music on weekends. Maybe we could go there for breakfast on Saturday?" Crystal's face lit up. "That sounds perfect. Are you sure you're ready for that, though? It'll probably be busier than the grocery store." Dan nodded, surprising himself with his own certainty. "I think I am. Being out tonight, it felt freeing, like I was finally being my true self in public. I want to experience more of that feeling." As they reached their apartment building, Crystal stopped and turned to face Dan. "I'm so incredibly proud of you," she said softly, reaching up to cup his face. "You've come so far in such a short time. I love seeing you like this, happy, confident, embracing who you are." Dan leaned into her touch, his eyes shining with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Chris. Your support means everything to me." The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation. Dan spent hours planning his outfit, wanting to strike the perfect balance between stylish and comfortable. He settled on a flowy midi skirt in a soft lavender shade, paired with a crisp white blouse and a light cardigan. Crystal helped him practice a more elaborate makeup look, complete with a subtle smoky eye and a pink lip. When Saturday morning arrived, Dan woke up early, butterflies fluttering in his stomach. He took his time getting ready, savoring each step of his now familiar routine. As he applied the finishing touches to his makeup, he caught sight of himself in the mirror and paused, struck by his own reflection. The person staring back at him was someone he was still getting to know, someone who looked softer, more authentic, more himself. He smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. "You ready to go?" Crystal called from the living room. Dan took a deep breath, smoothing down his skirt. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, stepping out of the bathroom. Crystal's face lit up when she saw him. "Oh, Dan," she breathed. "You look absolutely beautiful." Dan felt his cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you," he said softly. "Shall we?" They made their way downtown, Dan's nerves building with each step. As they approached the cafe, he could hear the soft strains of acoustic guitar drifting out onto the street. The place was busier than he'd anticipated, with several tables occupied both inside and out on the small patio. Dan hesitated for a moment, his hand tightening around Crystal's. "Maybe this wasn't such a good idea," he murmured, eyeing the crowded space. Crystal squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We can leave if you want to," she said. "But I think you can do this. Remember how well the grocery store went? This is just another step." Dan took a deep breath, steeling himself. "You're right. Let's go in." As they entered the cafe, the warm aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries enveloped them. A few heads turned in their direction, but most people quickly returned to their conversations or phones. Dan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. They approached the counter, where a young barista with vibrant blue hair greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning. What can I get for you today?" Dan cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how his voice might sound. "I'll have a vanilla latte, please," he said, his voice coming out higher than usual. "And a chocolate croissant." The barista nodded, jotting down the order. "Excellent choice. And for you, ma'am?" she asked, turning to Crystal.
As Crystal placed her order, Dan marveled at how normal this all felt. The barista hadn't batted an eye at his appearance or his voice. He felt a surge of confidence. They found a small table near the window, settling in with their drinks and pastries. The musician in the corner was playing a soft, melodic tune that filled the air with a pleasant ambiance. "So," Crystal said, taking a sip of her cappuccino, "how are you feeling?" Dan smiled, surprising himself with how genuine it felt. "Actually, I'm feeling pretty good. This isn't nearly as scary as I thought it would be." As they chatted and enjoyed their breakfast, Dan found himself relaxing more and more. He even caught himself laughing loudly at one of Crystal's jokes, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. But instead of feeling self-conscious, he felt seen, acknowledged. It was a powerful feeling. Halfway through their meal, a middle-aged woman approached their table. Dan tensed slightly, unsure of what to expect. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said, smiling kindly. "I just wanted to say that I love your outfit. The color of that skirt is gorgeous on you." Dan felt a rush of warmth flood through him. "Thank you so much," he replied, his voice full of genuine gratitude. As the woman walked away, Dan turned to Crystal, his eyes wide with amazement. "Did that really just happen?" Crystal grinned, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "It did. See? I told you that you look fantastic." They lingered over their breakfast, savoring both the food and the experience. Dan found himself people-watching, noticing the diverse mix of patrons in the cafe. There were couples, families, groups of friends, all going about their mornings, accepting his presence as just another part of the vibrant tapestry of the cafe. As they finally prepared to leave, Dan felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. This outing had been more than just a breakfast. It had been a step towards fully embracing himself in public. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.